Hello and welcome to the UNB Law podcast. My name is Michael Marin and I'm the Acting Dean of Law at UNB. We begin all of our events by recognizing and respectfully acknowledging that the UNB Law community gathers on the unsurrendered and unceded traditional lands of Wolastoqiyik. Today I have the pleasure of sitting down with Simone Cole, a graduate of the UNB Law class of 2006. Before law school, Ms. Cole studied at Mount Allison University before earning a Bachelor of Education degree and working briefly as a teacher. In less than 15 years of law practice, Ms. Cole has established herself as a leader among corporate counsel in Canada. After graduating from UNB Law with distinction, Ms. Cole articled at Torrey's in Toronto and worked there as an associate for 3 more years. She then moved in-house, becoming Senior Director Legal Counsel at George Weston Limited, which is a publicly traded food processing and food distribution company with nearly $50 billion in annual revenue. The company is behind such household brands as Atlantic Superstore, Loblaws, Shoppers Drug Mart, and many others. Ms. Cole is now Vice President and General Counsel of Weston Foods, which is a subsidiary of George Weston Limited. Ms. Cole, thank you so much for joining us on the UNB Law podcast. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure. Thank you.
So one of the ways that we start these podcasts is we like to ask our guests about their background, and so why don't you start by telling us a bit about your upbringing? Where are you from, and what was it like growing up?
Sure. So happy to. So I am from a pretty diverse family. My mom is from the West Indies. She's Black, and my dad is from Canada, 5 generations plus, and he's white. So I grew up in an interracial environment, sort of before it was maybe in vogue. I am from Ontario, although I went out to the Maritimes sort of in my late teens for university and spent 10 years in the Maritimes before coming back to Toronto.
That's really interesting. And so why did you decide to go to Mount Allison? You mentioned you kind of came out east. What drew you here?
It was a little bit of following in the tradition. So my mother in the 60s went to Mount Allison from Trinidad. The Atlantic schools were big in the islands, and so I followed suit and went out in 1996.
Neat. And then you earned an education degree at St. Thomas, and you taught for a little while. What drew you to education?
So I was asked that question a lot, even when I was interviewing for law jobs. I think I still have that, the teacher in me. And so when I finished undergrad, I wasn't quite sure I was ready for law school. And so I wanted to do an education degree. St. Thomas had the distinction of, at the time, I don't know if it still is, but it was the only 1-year program. And so it was a relatively low cost investment to do it. I'd also gone and lived in Quebec a year prior, so I had sort of spent a year studying French. And then I went to St. Thomas for an education degree and then taught French in St. John, New Brunswick.
Neat. And so how long did you teach for?
So my teaching career was relatively short. It was all in 3 years between finishing undergrad and going to law school. I sort of knew quite early when I was in my education degree that while this was, a good transitional period, I was meant to be in law school. And I started writing the LSAT and preparing while I was actually in teachers college.
That's really interesting. And what was it, do you think, that appealed to you about the law and going to law school?
Well, I mean, I had the introduction because my father's a lawyer, and he's 75 in a small private practice, and he's still going. So it wasn't the law wasn't completely novel to me, and I was always the kid that I guess maybe I was argumentative, who people said was going to be a lawyer. So it was kind of just, in some respects, fulfilling that piece of me that knew I needed to try and go to law school.
Neat. And And why UNB Law then? Were you just sort of familiar with it because you were at St. Thomas? Was it something else?
Well, I've been in New Brunswick and I love New Brunswick. I'd gone to Mount A. I was at the time teaching in St. John's, so it was quite natural. And there were lots of things about UNB. But New Brunswick specifically, I just had some life circumstances that made me want to stay in the province at that time. So it was a good fit.
That's great. And I'm curious what your first day of law school is like, because a lot of law students agonize about their first day of law school, and a lot of lawyers remember it. Do you remember that day? What were you feeling like at the time?
Yeah, the first day I don't remember. I think my first most vivid memory was the orientation, and I remember being in the student. I can't remember what it's called, the student hall on the main floor, and they were organizing the events and the barbecue. And I'll be honest with you, I was completely anxious. In fact, I was anxious for the first 6 months of law school,
Yeah.
um, but I distinctly remember that orientation meeting. Yeah.
Why do you think we feel that way? I mean, I was the exact same way. I had imposter syndrome. I thought that everyone was smarter than me. Yeah, exactly. Like the first 6 months, I was terrified. What is it about law school that makes everyone feel that way, do you think?
Well, I think being anxious isn't a bad thing as long as you can kind of harness it. And why? Because it's a pretty big endeavor. It's a big rigorous intellectual exercise. There's a getting up the curve. There's a big element of sort of being out of control. And so I think it's natural, especially if you take it seriously and you hold yourself to high standard. I think probably the high performers over index on being a bit anxious. Some are just better at maybe faking it than others.
Right. Fake it till you make it. Absolutely. And one of the things that I think it's helpful that we mention this is, sort of we normalize those feelings, right? That everyone that goes through that a little bit, whether in law school or at other stages in their lives, and it's normal. You can overcome it, and sometimes you surprise yourself about what you can actually achieve. So you graduated in '06, as I mentioned in the intro, not too long ago, but can you tell us a little bit about what the law school was like at the time?
Sure, sure. And look, I don't have the frame of reference to what it's like now, so it may be a lot the same and a lot different. It was intimate, right? It was small. It was a group that kind of went through war together. So that group of 80, you worked hard together during the week. You tended to play together on the weekends. So it was definitely a strong sense of community into your class that I remember quite distinctly.
And you were in two sections, is that right? So two sections of 40?
Yes, yes, and that's very true. I remember you tended to be much closer to your section because you literally were in class with those individuals for 20 plus hours every week, plus in the library.
Exactly. Did you spend a lot of time studying in the library?
I did. I had a sort of a designated desk. I used to sit on the upper level of the reading room, tucked away between the stacks. And yeah, I liked sort of having school at school and my home being, where I did other things and kind of defragged. So yes, I tended to work in the library.
It's interesting because, and this is one of the sad things about COVID. Obviously our building is closed, the library is closed. I'm sitting in the rare books reading room, and I'm just looking over there to the Mackay reading room, which is closed. And typically around this time of year, there would be students in here studying. It really is a special place, and we hear from students that that's one of the things that they miss is that room because it's a really beautiful space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember that, you know, just moments, that Justice Lafferty used to come in sometimes and he'd be sitting reading. And Like that was pretty special, right? To have a retired Supreme Court justice be downstairs reading, whatever he was reading, and you'd be sort of in his presence, getting ready for your torts exam or whatever it
Wow,
was. Yeah.
that is so neat. Did you ever have any interactions with him?
Um, I mean, if I did, they were sort of brief.
Yeah.
But I will say that Dean Lafray was one of the first people I met. So his daughter was the dean when I started. And I remember that I came by UNB to check it out. And my father was so surprised that I would do this, but I asked if I could have sort of impromptu a few minutes just to talk to her about coming to UNB. And I still remember that first conversation I had with her because I expressed that I was nervous about coming and nervous about law school. And I remember she told me, she said, you just have to take each day and find something that brings you joy, to balance out, because it's hard work. But whether it's a walk or a book, you just have to find that's something that gives your life, sort of rounds it out. So and that was probably 15 or 16 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's such a great story. And I know that Professor Laforêt will really love to hear that. And it's interesting too how you can be inspired just by being in the presence of others. That's a really special thing. And actually, the room that I'm sitting in is the Gérard Laforêt Rare Books Reading Room, and it's in the Gérard Laforêt Law Library. So, that legacy of his and Anne lives on, and they're a very special part of our history and our community. Um, what are some of your fondest memories from law school? I mean, you mentioned the reading room and Justice Laforêt and Professor Laforêt, but anything else stand out to you as a fond memory from your time at UNB Law?
Yeah, I mean, I've got countless kind of good memories. A lot of it blurs, right? So at the time when you're in law school, it's all so important, and all the assignments and the criticality of, this test or whatever. And I will say that, with the passage of time, it's it's sort of the quiet memories I have. So I think about, I used to walk a lot in Fredericton, and those are some of the memories I take with me. Just, the small things of going to the market on Saturday. I think I will always remember sort of getting ready for exams and sort of the amount that you could process in a short period of time, sort of sitting in the stacks, and the conversations you have with other law students who are getting ready for the exam the next day. That stuff, that stuff stays with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I mentioned in the introduction that you did very well as a law student. You graduated with distinction. And one of the things that, people who aren't familiar with our program don't realize is it's very hard to graduate with distinction. So typically there's only 3, 4, 5 at the most students who graduate with distinction every year out of a class now of up to 90, 92. So that is quite a remarkable accomplishment. And I'm just wondering if you have sort of any study tips, or how did you? I mean, obviously you were very, very bright and hardworking, but what do you think the secret to your success as a law student was?
I mean, sheer hard work. I really, it's funny. I'll tell you the story, and I told it, but more for the message, not just because of the fact that I achieved it, but I was, as I said to you, it wasn't just the first 6 weeks. I was really anxious all through that first year. It was a big leap, and I think if you're tend to have perfectionistic tendencies, you have this sort of, it's go big or go home, and sometimes you won't try because you're afraid of the failure. And that literally stuck with me through the first year. And I remember that I did well in the Christmas exams, and there was a professor who said something to me afterwards. It was Professor Dorr, and he sort of congratulated me, and I was a bit stunned because I didn't know, I knew I'd done well, but I had no sort of real sense of, the curve as they talked about. And then got through the second semester, worked really, really hard. tried to find, it wasn't just about reading the cases, but I tried to find other sources so that I could really understand what was going on and understand the significance. And then I remember when I came back the next fall, and I was sitting in Dean Williamson's office, and he said to me, "Simone, you did really well." And I said, "Great." And he said, in first year you came first. And I was like, whoa. And then he said, "By a lot." And that one floored me, because I mean this honestly, I never thought of myself as smarter. I actually assumed everybody else was smarter.
Right.
But the one thing I will say is that I will not be outworked. And I think that that ethos has carried me even to today. I don't profess to be the smartest, but I will do the most preparation. So I think that's maybe the secret, is just making sure that you understand and you work to understand.
That's a kind of, there's a theme for these podcasts. I think it's that, like, a lot of our guests have done really well, like you, in diverse fields. And the one thing that kind of they all have in common is they emphasize the importance of hard work. And they all say, I wasn't the smartest one, but I worked really, really hard. And that hard work prepares you to, seize opportunities. And I think that's a really important message for our students, that hard work can really be a great equalizer for them. And so after law school, you went to Torrey's in Toronto. What appealed to you about a career on Bay Street?
Yeah, and I'll be honest and say that when I went to UNB, I didn't go to UNB saying I'm 100% going to Bay Street. This is my dream. In fact, through that first year, I actually avoided the career fair discussions because I wasn't ready, and it just added to I needed to deal with the moment and deal with the courses and deal with feeling my way through first year. When I did well after first year, when I knew that I was now in a position that, I was going to get OCI interviews, I started to think about, going to Toronto. And I didn't really know a lot about these firms. I had a neighbor that worked at one of the big firms, and so I had asked her about it, and she had set up a lunch for me. So I had a little bit of an introduction, through an interview, a sort of an early interview, because a lot of the firms do start to court in the summer, the summer even after first year. For me, it was trying to talk to people who knew the big firm circuit, and that was a little harder being in New Brunswick. And then it was kind of feeling my way through the interview process when I was, actually on the street for that crazy week of interviews. And Torrey's was, it was differentiated to me in the way they sort of conducted themselves and the people that I saw. And so it sort of happened. But I can't tell you that I went into law school with a particular firm in mind. It sort of was a bit of an organic evolution.
And it's funny because I sort of had the same experience, and it's interesting. I ended up going the corporate route as well, but I wasn't intending that necessarily. Like you, I was just trying to do the best that I could. And sometimes you just have to take advantage of these opportunities that present themselves. So what was the transition like for you to Bay Street?
So the transition was kind of interesting, right? Because I was coming from a very different world, having been in the Maritimes for 10 years and coming into downtown Toronto. And I'll be honest with you, I was a little intimidated. I remember, going out for these fancy dinners, and, I had a sort of a more middle class upbringing, so I wasn't used to going to sort of the top end restaurants. And I remember on one of the dinners, the production of the wine being opened and this, swilling of the glass and the sniffing. And I was a little sort of taken aback by it all. And I remember that I couldn't actually read the menu, which was all in Italian. And so I ended up sort of saying, well, whatever this person is having. So there was a little bit of transition, but, and I thought truffles were literally chocolate. I thought that was a dessert.
Right.
But, you sort of acclimatize, and that stuff is a bit of the window dressing, and you can pick up through observation, and it doesn't take very long to sort of will yourself to being a bit more comfortable outside of your natural environment. But I would say that there was one thing coming from UNB that I wished I had been better prepared for, and that was maybe just the shot of confidence that coming from a smaller school, coming from a school not in Ontario, I think I wish I was just a little better prepared for that confidence game, that social game that you need to start in a big firm environment.
That's such a good point, and it's something that I noticed when I came to UNB. I was teaching at the University of Ottawa, and then I came here 4 years ago, and I found that the students were every bit as good as the students I taught at the U of O, but they lacked confidence, you know? So we've been trying to work on that a fair bit. What do you think we can do to address that? I mean, what are some things that you can say or do or provide to a law student or a young lawyer to give them a little bit more confidence? Because I think you're absolutely right. That's something that I think we need to emphasize more.
Yeah, I would say don't come in with a sort of an aw shucks, thanks for including me. And you don't have to come in on the opposite end of the spectrum being entitled or arrogant. There's there's a quiet confidence that you have to develop, because it does go to the resilience too, that you deserve to be here. You belong, you have earned your spot. And so how do you prepare? I think, look, it does start probably with that maybe the tone from the top on, look, this is an elite law school. You're an elite group. You're special to be here. A little bit of that, there's nothing wrong with feeling, a bit proud of the institution you're at. And then I think the more you expose people and give people access to mentors who have done this route, to learn that they're really not that different, and they have the same insecurities. I think so. I think exposure, and I really think that is the cure to feeling out of place, is that when you get to a bigger pond, whether it's Toronto, whether it's Halifax, whether it's Vancouver, you find people that will help you navigate and that will help you find the opportunities to prove yourself, because confidence is a flywheel, and you just have to get it started, and you have to get a chance to prove yourself, and then the confidence comes, and it sort of starts to turn. So I think, get the students' confidence sort of starting to turn early, so that they feel like they belong. And it's amazing the doors that will open.
Oh, that's such good advice. I really, really appreciate that. And that's a lot of what we're trying to do. I mean, when you look at the history of UNB Law and the remarkable people that it's produced, and how, sort of on the surface, this success would be improbable. This small law school, one of Canada's smallest law schools, in a small region, producing premiers and cabinet ministers and judges all across the country, and business leaders and government public servants. It really is a remarkable legacy, and we're trying to sort of do more to celebrate that, so our students see themselves, in that success. I think it's really important. I just want to ask you a little bit about your work at Torrey. So what kind of legal work did you focus on when you were there?
Sure, happy to. So Torrey's is a business law firm. Most of the associates who come in will go into the corporate stream, and then there are some, I don't want to call them subgroups. What are they called? Specialty areas that support the corporate group, but it's transactional. So I was in the corporate commercial group. As a young associate, you tend not to be highly specialist. So I did M&A mostly, corporate, M&A, mergers and acquisitions, public deals, private deals, a little bit of securities work. But but that was the mainstay was sort of corporate transactions. And I think I rotated through the litigation group and I rotated through the real estate group, but spent the lion's share of my time sort of working on some big transactions that year. When I went through, it was kind of an interesting time because it was 2006, 2007. So there was lots of activity. The economy was like bustling. There weren't enough associates. We were very busy. And then, of course, you fast forwarded when I came back as an associate, and within a year, the financial crisis had happened, and so that was in a very different picture. It was sort of the tale of two stories.
That's really interesting, and it's funny because I started my career in private practice around that time too, and one of the things that was challenging post-crisis is the junior associates really had to, maybe fight is too strong a word, but you really had to be proactive about getting good work because there wasn't, at least in my experience in my firm, there wasn't as much of it around. And so you really had to kind of be proactive to get the experience that would help move your career forward. Maybe that's particularly the case during a downturn, but my sense is that's always important, particularly in a large firm. Because even though you're in a big organization, a lawyer is always responsible for their own sort of professional development. And so I'm just wondering if you have any advice for sort of an articling student or a junior associate. How do you make sure that you're getting that good work and that you continue to develop your skills?
That's such a great question because it's so funny. The first thing I thought about is, the expression, what got you here isn't going to take you there. And it is very true about hard work and getting, doing well in law school. But that's sort of, once you get into a firm, right, it's a different ballgame because no one's judging you sort of they're judging you on the merits of your work, but there's a whole lot of other skill sets that come in that will make you successful in a firm, in a company. And I think the one you're touching on is really about finding good people who you can tuck in with, particularly in the early years, who are going to invest in you, they're going to find opportunities for you to learn and grow. Hopefully they don't throw you completely off the deep end and, stress you out too much, because that does happen. But you want to tuck in and you want to start finding some relationships, finding some mentors, and the mentors too who will protect you, because when things are really busy, you'll be pulled in all different directions, and you need some people who will sort of defend your time so that you're not completely pulled. And then I think the same is true when the economy starts to contract, and you've got to find people who've got work coming in who can kind of keep you fed, because let's be honest, this is a business and you've got to have hours at the end of it. You've got to sort of justify the square footage of your office and your overhead. So it is really, really important that you find people who will help you grow your career and develop you. It's probably the single most important factor in your success in a firm.
And I think this kind of goes to a point you were making earlier about confidence, because if I think about some of the colleagues who I had at my firm early in my career, they were all very talented and all sort of had ability, but some of them would just sort of stay in their offices and wait for the work to come to them. And so, I was in litigation, so they would get the doc review and that kind of thing. And, some of us were just more proactive and sort of and confident, I suppose, in going out to get the work and, talking to the partner, a senior associate, say, hey, I heard you have an interesting file. Could I maybe do a little bit of work on that, And then you try to prove yourself, and then maybe that leads to a further assignment. And then all of a sudden you're on that matter on an ongoing basis. So, that confidence that you were talking about is, I think, really important as well in terms of making sure that you're getting the best experience possible in a larger firm.
I completely agree. And yeah, you have to sort of take ownership of where you want your career to go. There's sort of there's no other way to say it. I will say you also see some people overplay their hand a little bit, and look, you can't. You want to make sure you stay authentic, and so when you're sort of approaching senior people, it's really from a place of you genuinely have interest, as opposed to sort of just, you'll see the sort of game players who are looking for the biggest name so they can kind of affiliate themselves, or it's a bit of profile building. But that being said, smartly, strategically, authentically seeking out people who you want to work for. There is no smarter strategy getting into a firm. That will be the longevity that you'll have in your career, is finding people who you want to work for and who are going to invest the time in you so that you grow and develop, and you don't end up just doing the doc review or the due diligence. A little bit you have to do because you have to cut your teeth, but it's not a zone you want to stay in forever.
Right. Those types that you were alluding to at my firm, they used to call them gunners, and it was pretty obvious who they were. So you don't want to be a gunner, but at the same time, as you say, you want to be genuinely interested and sort of pursue what you're passionate about, and try to sort of get higher and higher level work. So after a little while at Torrey's, you decided to go in-house, and I'm just wondering why you made that decision and what that transition was like.
Sure, happy to. So it was like March of 2009, and the financial crisis was, I think this was like the lowest point in the economy, and the TSX was the most, you know, it had contracted the most at this point, and the firm was looking for ways to kind of have associates. They didn't have enough work for all of us, and so they were encouraging us, to the extent we wanted to do a secondment, that they would place us with clients. And this is something that a lot of the big firms do. Whether their clients are banks or insurance companies, they will give you an opportunity to go for a few months and work at the client. And it's good for the firm because it hopefully develops your knowledge and it makes the work route back to the firm. And many clients love secondments because they have lots of leaves and things to cover. So March 2009, I actually, at this point, I'm going to tell you a little bit of a diversion story first, which was I had met my future husband in the most unlikely of places. I had sat next to him at the call to the bar ceremony. So we met, and even though he was from Toronto, he was in Ottawa. And so we were in different cities. And so when 2009 came around, we weren't married at this point, but it seemed like an opportunity where maybe I could get a chance to go and work at a client in Ottawa and sort of be with him as well. And so I got my chance. I went to a big power company, and I had 3 months to go and work in Quebec, sort of on the border of Ottawa. And that was pretty cool. I will say to you that it was cool because I got to transition out of the firm life and see something else and live in a different city. I didn't love the job, and it was, I was a contract person essentially. So I don't think I got the best work that the company had to offer. But it was a really valuable opportunity because it allowed me to realize that for me to go in-house, you really want to find a job where you love the product, like you're invested in the product, particularly as in-house, because you're working essentially for the product. So I had that opportunity to go to this big power company. And at the end, they did offer me a job, and I was at this point of, okay, do I stay at a job I think I've worked harder for this to be my landing point? Do I go back to the firm? And so I actually called a recruiter, and I asked them about in-house jobs in Ottawa so that I could stay. And they didn't have anything in Ottawa. It's a smaller market. There aren't as many companies. They had, more tech opportunities, but again, the economy wasn't really great at this point. But they said, we have this amazing opportunity back in Toronto, although you're a bit late because they've done a long cycle of interviewing and you'd really be coming in at the end. And I said, okay, well, I'm happy to try a phone interview. And so a few days later, I had a phone interview and it went well. And they said, well, will you come in sort of this Friday for an in-person interview? And it was the Friday before Thanksgiving. And I said, sure. I think I can fly in Thursday night and interview Friday. And so I did. And I actually sort of went right up to meeting the chief legal officer that day. And I was totally exhausted at the end of it. And then I got a call at 5 o'clock and they offered me the job.
Wow.
And it was pretty cool. I think, look, they had, I was lucky in the sense too that they had been through their cycle. And so they were ready to commit. And then ultimately I committed pretty quickly. And so that's how I started at George Weston. And that was November 2009 that I started.
Wow, that's so cool. And there's this is another theme that we're seeing through these podcasts, is that a lot of law students try to map out their whole career, right? This is like the A-type personality thing where everything has to go a certain way and they try to predict the future. And what I've experienced myself and, what I've observed from my classmates, and now I'm hearing from our alumni and guests on this podcast is, life doesn't always work out that way. And you got to kind of take risks, put yourself out there. I mean, you kind of knew that you weren't really happy with this power company opportunity. Says, oh, well, let's see what else is out there. And even though they kind of told you, oh, well, it might not work out, you still said, hey, I'm going to try, I mean, I think there's a lot of lessons in that. And so how long have you been with George Weston and now it's Weston Foods, right? If I'm not mistaken. How long have you been with the company?
Yeah, so it's been it was 11 years in November.
Wow.
And just to your point, you often hear people say it in the negative, like, well, what's the worst that can happen? Look down the barrel of that gun. What's the worst? And I think you have to look at it like, what's the best that can happen?
Right.
What if you take that risk? I don't know how you could map out an entire career. I suppose there are some people who come into law school knowing exactly what they want to do. And I'd say maybe my husband was one of them, who's a criminal lawyer, although he thought he'd start on the defense and he's been a Crown his whole career. But I could not have, and I hope this is why this might be helpful to a UNB student, but I could not have guessed what I would be doing when I was, in law school. I didn't have the conception of it. And even when I went to, big law, I knew intuitively that I didn't really feel the partnership. I knew I could do it if I really put my sort of heart, soul, energy behind it. But it's okay that when you go, you may not sort of buy the end product. What I did feel was I felt like by taking the risk, by going to, for me, one of the best opportunities available, by going to one of the best firms, by getting the training, I knew that there was something good that would come out of it. I knew it was an investment. And that's kind of was my compass when an opportunity came about that didn't feel like it was good enough. Like that was my compass to say, yeah, I think you can there's something better than this. Yeah, it checks boxes, but you're not going to be satisfied with this. And then there's a leap of faith. There was nothing specific about George Weston at the time that made me say, I absolutely need to take this job. There was a lot of gut, right? There was a lot of gut feel. I was like, this is an important Canadian company. This is a blue chip company. And the opportunity felt good. And I was working with some, great lawyers. So I think you have to have some intuition on where you should go, but I don't know how you could map it all out. There's just too many opportunities.
And it also takes, I think, some confidence too to say, yeah, well, this power company, maybe on paper it's all right, but I think I can do better. Like there's some confidence going on there as well.
Yeah, well, I will tell you, that was a great Canadian company too.
Yeah.
I just knew the job intuitively wasn't for me. And again, my kind of compass in this is if you're going to go in house, I think feeling a connection to the product is really important. Like it sounds obvious, but if you believe in what you're doing, what you're selling, if you feel that connection, it's all the more real. My job right now is bakery, right? We've got brands. We've brands like Wonder Bread and D'Italiano and Country Harvest and Gadois or Ace Bakery, if you might know, if you're sort of a bit, I don't know if you have Ace in the Maritimes, do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's bakery. And again, I love the business discussions we have. I love, when we're into brands because I can feel that connection. It's something that I relate to. So.
That's so interesting. And in law school, we don't often have an opportunity to explain, or we don't have sort of the exposure to what it is that an in-house lawyer actually does. Our professors were not in-house lawyers, at least I'm not familiar with any. I didn't know when I was in law school what an in-house lawyer does, but so many of my classmates and colleagues ended up going in-house. So can you explain to our audience, what does an in-house lawyer do?
Sure. And I'm going to give you the caveat, it depends on the job, right? It depends on the role. So it's very specific. When I was at George Weston, the job was much more like a firm because it was transactional and there was a securities element as working because it was a public company. I went in-house, or I transferred to the bakery side, the food manufacturing side of the business 3.5 years ago. And my job is much more operationally based. And so what does that mean? It means that I'm dealing with labor and employment issues. I'm dealing with contractual issues. I am dealing with food safety issues. I am dealing with litigation. I essentially truly have a general practice because it's sort of anything that can hit a business, an operating business that has a legal element to it, will come to me and my team.
Wow. How do you kind of stay abreast of all of that? I mean, it sounds like there's so many areas of law in there. Obviously, you have a team supporting you, but is that challenging to kind of be familiar with all of these areas of law, or is it part of the job that really appeals to you?
Well, I think it's both. I think it's challenging and it's part of the job. So, yeah. I mean, the one thing is, you do get this, having been in big law, you get regular bulletins from the various law firms. So one of the easiest ways of keeping apprised is when an issue hits, you can expect 10 bulletins on it. So it usually doesn't take, if you're paying attention to your email, you'll get a good sense on what you need to pay attention to. Look, you have to stay sort of curious and connected. It's a little bit harder in COVID because there aren't as many professional sessions, but the law firms do a pretty good job of offering tons and tons and tons of breakfast meetings, lunch meetings to keep you current. There are umpteen different service providers who are constantly calling you to sell you whatever compliance tool.
Yeah.
And then really, and I think this is part of being the general counsel, is I cannot know everything, right? And so the best thing I have is a strong team. It's the most critical part of my job, is to have people who will sweat the details and make sure that they can brief me and keep me apprised of what I need to know. So I think that's how I'd answer it. You got to sort of stay connected, and you've got to rely on people to help you know what you need to know.
And how much of it is, because you're, vice president, general counsel, so you kind of wear a lawyer hat, but you're also a business leader as well, and you're providing, I imagine, strategic advice, business advice, or you're part of those conversations. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? How do you develop sort of that knowledge base and skills as a lawyer? Because I imagine that a big part of being in house and as a general counsel is now, yes, you're still a lawyer and a legal advisor, but you're also part of the executive team, and so there's a business side of this as well.
I think you actually hit on the nail of the head, or you hit the nail of the head of the nail.
Yeah, I like that.
Something like that. You hit the nail on the head.
There you go.
So yeah, I think that is one of the biggest, I will tell you that in-house lawyers for a long time, maybe I don't chip on the shoulder is the wrong expression, but it's that sense of, you left big law. And so there was a little bit of step down, or maybe a bit of an inferiority complex. But I would say that has really largely diminished as you've seen a lot of great lawyers take on good in-house jobs. And it's largely because they want to be more connected to the business. That it's really quite fun to be in a business and to be part of sort of the journey of a business, because businesses go through their cycles of ups and downs. And what you do as an in-house lawyer, that really kind of makes you a great in-house lawyer. And I'm not professing to be a great in-house lawyer, but I'm going to say that the skill set is that you speak the business's language, that you can contribute to the strategic discussions, because the law firms end up, in many respects, being hired guns, right, to do transactional things, or to get you out of jams, or to deal with a file. And in-house, if it was all about outsourcing, that would be the model. There's an expectation that you will contribute, and your lens is legal, but that you are really a business advisor with a legal expertise, and you bring that whole sort of skill set to the table and offer that perspective. And certainly my president is not interested in having me come to meetings and sort of speak about the law. He would like me to speak as a business partner, and to provide a legal sort of framework or component to it. So yes, it is in-house. If you want to do well in-house, you have to start doing well with the business and speaking their language and contributing to their objectives.
Is that one of the reasons why, what you mentioned earlier, that you really have to love the product? Because, if you know the product and you can immerse yourself in it, that allows you to be really engaged in the business side of the work.
Yeah, well, I think it really helps. I think it's if you're not invested in what your business is doing, and I mean that sort of deeply and intuitively, it's hard to bring that passion. And I think one of the things I've looked at is making sure you come to work with that passion. So yes, I would highly advise that if you're thinking about making a move, that you take the time to make sure you feel some connection to the product that the business is selling.
That's great. Now, one of the transactions that you were part of, and you've been part of many, but was your company's acquisition of Shoppers Drug Mart in 2013. And that was a big deal, $12.4 billion. Now, most of our students, and certainly the average person, wouldn't even begin to understand, what a transaction like that looks like from a legal perspective, certainly what an in-house lawyer does on a deal like that. Can you tell us a little bit about, that process? Like what are you actually doing when you're in the throes of such a massive, blockbuster deals in the newspapers and everything? And what's your life like at the time like that?
Yeah, well, and look, I'll tell you from both perspectives, being in the firm and being in the company.
Okay.
So like I'm going to say this, my audience here is for students. So I don't want anyone who does this for a living to think I'm condescending to them. But essentially, right, with these deals, what you're looking to do is there's a period of diligence, right, where companies are looking at opportunities and they want to research the target company. And so there's a period of due diligence. And so that could mean that you're doing everything from pulling all the public reporting that is done either on their websites or on CDAR. And you're trying to understand the health of the business and the pipeline and the strategy, so you get a sense of what you're paying for. And then as lawyers, you come in and there will be that negotiation and a series of transactional documents that will sort of begin to consummate the relationship, whether it's a purchase agreement or there are various different types of agreements, but essentially it's the consummating agreement. And then there's that long period of time between closing where there are various regulatory approvals that have to happen, whether it's competition law or, there's various, other government approvals that have to be sought and consents to do a transaction. And then there's typically a closing, and the closing is when, the parties have waived their conditions and the money will flow. Not dissimilar to, buying a house, right? And that's usually where the big firms end. They get to the closing, they have a fabulous dinner, and the file is sort of put away. And that's where in-house lawyers come in, because now you've got these two companies with very different cultures, with very different incentive plans, with different types of agreements. And you start working to help the businesses bring companies together. I will also say that as an in-house lawyer, when you're supporting on these big transactions, you're the conduit. You're the conduit for the business and for the big firm that's putting the deal together. And you're also, because you live with it, unlike the firm, you're double checking, you're reading agreements, you're making sure that it marries up, you're making sure that the key risks that you know about in your business are being accounted for. So you sort of translate between the very formal legal things that have to happen and the business objectives. And that doesn't stop sort of through the deal into the integration. And so there was lots of work even after Shoppers was acquired. And I have to say, the work then tends to go into the operations. And so even when I was at George Weston, you do finish the deal and then it's over to the operating businesses. Well, now I'm in an operating business. And so I know what it's like to have to sort of, whether it was, we bought Ace Bakery 10 years ago, it was one of my first deals. Well, today that's a brand, but that's something that we've had to integrate over time. So I see it sort of in my day to day.
Oh, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought of sort of the in-house lawyer's role, post deal or post closing, the integration, but that's so true. I mean, that would be a huge challenge. I'm just thinking about, HR, for example. I mean, that would be, but yet they're in a big company like that. There are just so many other departments to deal with. So how long does it take to iron all of that out? The integration of a business.
I mean, it's hard to give a set answer. It depends how big the deal is, and it depends on what the strategy is. Some companies don't want to fully integrate, so they might buy. They're called bolt-on acquisitions, and they might buy a smaller business, and they want to preserve the magic of that small business, and they don't want it to get sort of, I don't want to use the word mired, but brought into all the processes and procedures of a much bigger company. They want to keep it sort of standalone and keep the magic that was. And some companies will say, no, we want consistent procedures and policies. So it totally depends on the circumstance. But, what you do as in-house is you really are that translator. So, HR is a great example. I certainly do not terminate people and sit through HR meetings per se, but they do come to me regularly because they want to pressure test an issue and make sure it doesn't run offside the law. I had a call today about wanting to offer a certain retention, and we went under the hood on the motives for it, and ultimately we were good with it. But it tends to be that you will become the advice center for your business, and it's not uncommon for me to then call my big law. And in fact, I don't actually use big law when it comes to HR because boutiques are better. But my job is to make sure that I've got really great go-tos.
Yeah.
And really good external partners who give me the straight goods so that I can then translate it back to the business. But I would say one of the things about in-house that I love is you must be practical. I was doing last week, and we just announced it Friday, but we were working really hard. We sold a bunch of properties, portfolio properties to our sister company, the REIT. So we did, myself and my colleague, we did an $80 million transaction. Now, of course, we had external help us because real estate is a special beast, and we leased back long-term the assets. So we sold them, but we took them back as a long-term tenant. And of course, I needed, external lawyers to help me draft, but we were very much in engine room, making sure that the business points, filtering, deciding what was critical and what wasn't. And one of the keys as an in-house lawyer is you must find those really good external providers who are practical. Because in the middle of that deal, another provider sent me, a 4-page memo on some esoteric points of the law. And it really cheesed me off because I had to call and say, what am I to do with this? I'm about to close. Is there anything I'm sitting on that's material? Like, what is this? So my point being, your service providers are critical, just like your own team, getting people who understand crisp, practical advice.
Yeah, so that's good advice, whether you're in-house or in a firm. Absolutely. So I'm just wondering, and then this last segment that we have, we can maybe go to a little more advice. I know we've talked about it a little bit, but maybe some advice, more specific advice for law students and young lawyers. And one of the things that you mentioned in the beginning is that you're from a mixed race family. We hear from a lot of law students and young lawyers from racialized and marginalized backgrounds that it's difficult to navigate Bay Street a little bit. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, what some of those challenges might be and what we can do to address them.
Yeah, I think I'd start by saying that I think there's been a big reckoning, and even over the last year, that big law, but not just big law, lots of institutions have to do better. So I would say optimistically that there is a lot of desire to rethink how things were done. Let me give you a practical example of what I'm talking about. When I went through the process in the mid 2000s, you'd hear it, and you'd hear it even after you had the job. There was a lot of talk about fit, and lawyers went to this very sort of amorphous definition of what fit was, and everyone accepted that, yeah, we have to find people who fit, because let's be honest, when you get to the interview stage, everyone's been vetted. They're smart, they've gotten good grades, they kind of get the cut, they've made the cut. And lawyers fell back on this definition. Well, we got to make sure they fit our culture, and nobody really defined what that meant, and it so easily became, well, it's the people you club with, it's the people that have the cottage in the Muskokas, who go to the same, restaurants, who can speak your language and make you feel comfortable as the interviewer because they know how to behave. And I think what you'll hear now is people are not using that word fit because it just so easily becomes part of the same socioeconomic background. And I do think that firms have had a reckoning, and they really are working harder to make sure that they're challenging their own assumptions. And I will tell you, even when I went through Torrey's, I still distinctly remember the woman who kind of advanced me in the rounds, and she said to me in the interview, "You are such a breath of fresh air." So I say that as I do think that firms want to be more inclusive, and they're looking for more diverse candidates. And I'd also say, walk through that door. Don't be afraid that you've never eaten at the Italian restaurant and can't pronounce the words or don't know how to open a bottle of wine. I didn't really know that either. And ultimately, it was no arbiter in my success or my journey within the firm. It's just something you can learn. And I think you have to accept that there will always be cultural things because, let's be honest, a lot of people who work in big firms make a lot of money, and they will be a little removed from the average person's daily life. And they're not going to change on a dime. There's a lot of privilege that goes into law. But they are open to more experience. And I think they recognize that, frankly, as a business, they do better when they reflect the groups that they service.
Well, I'm relieved to hear that. I think that's wonderful. This idea of fit, very problematic in my view for the reasons that you mentioned. I mean, obviously, I never experienced this in the same way, certainly as someone from a racialized background, but I'll just share a brief anecdote. So when I was practicing, my office mate, my first year was a Black woman from the South. This was in New York, and she, came from a very modest background, but her parents valued education, and she did very well, and ended up at this New York law firm. And we were office mates, so kind of we saw our respective experiences. And one of the things that was disturbing for me to see was I was getting pretty good work without trying too hard, and my friend was just sort of getting overlooked and not getting the same kind of work. We were both in the litigation department, and I remember our evaluation came out. We had this formal evaluation, and so I got all the top check marks, and my friend did well too, but there was a comment that said, you need to improve your writing. And I said to her, well, have they even given you a writing assignment yet? She's like, no, I never, I never got to write anything.
Yeah.
And I found this very disturbing because, to me, that was, it was racism. Like if you, and probably not overt or conscious, but certainly systemic, maybe that, and stereotyping, like because she was from the South and, Black and had an accent, that meant she was a poor writer, even though they never gave her a chance to write anything. Now this was a while ago, and I have very fond memories of my firm, and they're quite progressive, as an institution and in terms of policy. But my sense was that these things are deeply rooted, as you say. There's a lot of privilege in big law, and it really requires sort of a conscious effort to root it out. And so, anyways, it's a little experience of mine from about 12 years ago, but I'm happy to see that or hear that things are improving in that regard.
Yeah, I think they are. I mean, I think it starts with I think one of the things we've probably seen in 2020 is the first step is that there's an awareness of things that people have either not seen or chosen not to see for a long time. So I think that's a very good first step.
Yeah,
that's a place to stop, right? So the proof will be in the pudding as more opportunities are made. And you asked me what can be done, and I do think it goes back to our central theme of confidence. You have to get over this imposter syndrome and this sense that you're second class, because it is amazing. People will treat you the way you sort of believe you should be treated. And so I think whether you're from, not the richest part of the country, whether you're not from the richest background, it doesn't matter. If you've earned your chops and you've earned your place, find the quiet confidence. That doesn't mean come in thinking because there's a real humbling that comes when you start in the law practice, right? You've gotten to the third year of law school, you kind of figured it out. More leisure time because you know how to strategically study and prepare for things, and you've earned your dues to enjoy sort of getting to the top. But there is a resetting that comes when you start in practice and you realize you really don't know a lot about the practice of law, and that's okay. So don't over-index on, faking it or being, saying things that you don't know, because you will be found out relatively quickly. But it's more of that sort of belief in your ability and your belief to get there, and the confidence to know that you will get up the curve because you've got all the skill sets and you've got the discipline and the hard work. And that's the quiet confidence I would tell the young lawyer or the UNB grad, which is believe in yourself, believe that you can do it.
And it's interesting because that confidence and belief is part of what pushes you, I think, to work harder. Because if you don't think that any good will come of your effort, then you're not going to take the risk of putting in the work, right? So that's maybe another side to it too. That you need that confidence in order to, put in the work that'll ultimately get you noticed and treated with respect. So these things kind of come full circle a little bit. But what happens when things don't work out? Like when you have a setback? Because I see this with a lot of our students. They have done very well before law school, and they come here, and there's a big adjustment that they go through. I mean, most students, their grades go down relative to their undergrad, and they have to temper their expectations a little bit. And some of them, really, that's very challenging for them. Like they're not used to that kind of setback, and then when they get out of law school, there are setbacks in their professional life as well. Maybe they don't get hired back at their firm or something like that. Do you have any advice for dealing with that kind of adversity?
I mean, sure. I think that's a really important lesson. If you think it's going to go smoothly and be perfect and you will sail through, you're wrong. And even your best efforts sometimes will not bear the fruit. So I would say, look, I'm going to say this: you have to prepare, right? You have to, just like you had the work ethic in law school and you prepared for the exam and you worked diligently through a semester. You can hope that you can rely that you've prepared yourself for the test. But sometimes stuff happens. And the same in a career, right? You will work hard, but invariably things will not go the way you expect them to go. Whether you're litigating, and I mean, it's one of the reasons we settle is because 50% of the time, who knows if you'll get the judge on a bad day, if they've had breakfast, if something cheeses them off. I had something last week where I had to go to the highest levels and try to talk through what happened. It will happen. And I think you cannot crumble. This is the part of the skill set that goes beyond just working hard. It's being able to deal when the pressure really ratchets up and keeping your sanity and being able to not have your amygdala go crazy where you can't find words and you're just completely panicked. You have to cycle your energy and look, it's a bit of a skill set. And when you first start, you're not going to be put up into the most high pressure situations. In fact, you'll hopefully work your way into being part of some crucial conversations where you hear really good leaders, really big partners talk about issues. But it is a skill set to develop the same way you want to develop a skill set, your sort of intellectual toolkit. And that skill set is resilience. And it is about being able to carry on when things get quite tough.
So you obviously acquired those skills and that ability. How does one go about doing that practically? Because and this is advice just as much for law students as it is for UNB Law, because there's a lot of emphasis being placed, and one of things that I'd like to see us do is help students develop these skills. So what does one do, or maybe what did you do on a practical level to help you get there in terms of your mindset and your resilience?
Yeah, I'm going to say though, it is a journey. I don't think I'm there. I see it as a development path, and I'm better than I was. And my own journey is to always be better. And look, COVID has been an opportunity to keep getting better at resilience, right? When you're dealing with running a business with, a pandemic surging on both sides of the border. But to your question about what do you do? I don't know that you can learn other than by doing. And so it starts with, when you start to lead a team and you have interpersonal conflict and you learn how to address issues. it really is as simple as managing through pressure and trying to problem solve and keeping your cool and using your toolkit. I don't know that you can learn it. I think you have to be conscious of it. And I think you can also be conscious of the fact that it may not be your biggest strength coming in. To be honest with you, I see many more people who are what I'd call silver tongues. And that's not me, and I'm not going to try to be a silver tongue. But you have to, and this is why the confidence game is important. You have to inspire confidence in others that you'll manage it. Because, I remember a partner at Torrey said to me, Simone, it's not what happens, it's how you recover. And so you just have to learn how to recover and figure it out and convey it in a way that's honest and confidence inspiring. Because to think that things aren't going to go wrong, I mean, you pick the wrong business if you don't want to deal with problems.
Right. And then there's that flywheel metaphor that you used earlier, which is, well, you can overcome, one bit of adversity, and that equips you for the next one and the next one. And then, other people recognize that leadership ability in you. And you can almost think about it, I suppose, as an opportunity, to, as you say, to get better.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a baseline, right? So you look back and you say, okay, well, what could I handle at that point in my life? Well, I could handle this. And that was kind of my threshold, my tolerance for stress. And I think getting more senior means you can handle more, right? You can solve more. Your threshold for pressure, your threshold for dealing with situations increases. To me, that's kind of a challenge.
Right.
I kind of like that challenge. I don't always like it in the moment, but I like the challenge. And gosh, it's satisfying when you can figure something out. And I do think as a lawyer, one of the things I've learned is and especially through a pandemic, again, this perfectionism thing has to fall away because you may not get the perfect solution. You have to sort of do the best with the circumstances and feel your way through it. And I'd also add, one of the things you bring as a lawyer is you have to keep the ethical component of it and make sure that there are lots of solutions out there, but that you hold yourself and the business to account for a high standard of a solution.
Another sort of challenge that our students have, and I mean, just from your description of your day, and sort of the types of work that you encounter, and people calling you for advice and all kinds of things happening. How do you sort of stay productive and manage your time? I'm just, because a lot of students struggle with that. I struggle with that still. Maybe everyone struggles with it, and you just get better, kind of like dealing with adversity. But I imagine in your job, you have all kinds of people calling you and fires to put out. I mean, you're kind of like the problem solver, so to speak, and that could really mess with one's schedule. So, how do you handle that part of your job?
Well, look, I think, first of all, I'm not a department of one, and so I try not to put myself out as the front line. I am at a certain level because my boss would like to speak with me. And that's a call I will always take. But I try not to be like, there's a certain level in the organization I can't be, because there's just it's not going to be elevated. Anyway, I'm not the best person to try to sift through what the issue is.
Yeah.
So one is your team appropriately sort of deployed, and when you come in house, one of the things you have to do is have a good operating model of how the work is rooted, because you can't be on the receiving end of every phone call. But even if, things are at a certain level and you are, shall we say, a hot commodity, like I don't know that I have any special sort of tips and tricks. I block time. I also find that you have to account for the fact that sometimes your day is not going to be the most productive in terms of the work you want to do. And so it's about making sure you get your deliverables done. And sometimes it is at night, and sometimes it is, in the morning. But I will tell you, one of the things I have learned is that I am far more productive taking more time off on the weekend than I used to. So So I think it's a balance, right? You have to sort of make your time well spent, so that, because there's the other trap where you're sort of always in front of your computer, but there isn't a whole lot of production happening.
Right.
So I try to balance. I'm also a mom of two young boys, and that is a pleasure for me and a lot of my time. So I have a lot of other things in my life that give me meaning, and I'm not prepared to sacrifice them to work all the time. So COVID has been quite exceptional for getting some time back. And I think we can't lose sight of some of the good. So not commuting, I can start my day at 7. Like there's time in the schedule. To me, it's amazing how much more time we have where we're not running out the door doing things.
Do you think, just speaking of COVID, because as a general counsel, you, I think, have a really unique perspective on trends in the legal services market, right? Because you're a consumer of these services. Do you think COVID is going to have kind of a long-term effect on that? Are there any other kind of big trends that you're seeing happening right now that may carry forward here?
It's an interesting question. So yeah, like in terms of services and the labor market, it still is very much Bay Street. So of my team, all of us came from Bay Street. And so when I think about my service providers, they still tend to be from big law, and I hire from big law because that's the talent pool. I don't know if they'll be long term, to be honest with you. I if we all had a crystal ball, I think obviously we're going to sort of muddle our way through 2021. I don't know that I think one of the things, this is probably more short term, but we have a hard time in our business with our legal service providers sort of wanting to upcharge the rates every year as associates move through the ranks. And that kind of risks us because we may be in a business where we've seen top line declines. And why does one business get to just push through increases for arguably their succession model, not mine?
Right.
So for the last number of years, we've really pushed back on value billing, but I don't know. I don't know if we know yet in the legal business whether COVID will be a true disruptor. I think it's still a bit TBD.
One of the trends that I've observed, just sort of speaking to managing partners and these types at law firms, is they're changing their spaces, like their office spaces. So when I was in practice, there were kind of big offices that were around the periphery of the building, and all the administrative staff were kind of in the middle and in pools, but there was still a lot of, like, everyone had their own office, or when you were in your first year, you shared an office, and the offices were fairly big. And it looks like now the firms are moving towards much smaller kind of offices, like just, one managing partner was telling me that they've gone down to 100 square feet kind of thing, or 110 square feet. So sort of small spaces which just have enough for your workstation, and then more like communal areas, more collaborative spaces. There they seem to be more open to people working remotely. And have you observed that a little bit? And I'm curious, well, what's driving that? Because I wonder if it's cost, like kind of what you mentioned. The clients are saying, well, why are we paying for you to have these big offices? We're really, like, what we're looking for is value. Like, we don't care if you do it in like a big lavish office. So what do you make of that? Have you observed that at all?
Yeah. I mean, I've observed it, in a few, yes, there's nothing that kind of, when you go to a big firm and you've got a meeting and you kind of know you're paying for all this infrastructure, right? Whether it's investment banking firms or law firms. I think law firms have had to, and I'm not in big law, and I'm not a partner, so I'm going to say it with this caveat, but they have to justify their existence. And I think, the days of it sort of big transactions coming in and we can throw 20 associates at it and it will turn, this big, massive work stream will turn into what will ultimately be one or two deal issues that might be found in the needle of a haystack. Some of that is just the clients don't want to pay, and they don't want to have all of this for a memo that's not particularly practical. Yeah, and I think the associates have said, why do I need to schlep all the way into downtown on all this transit and lose 2 hours? And I can't really afford to live in the city anyway because the market is crazy. So I think there's to use the word again, a reckoning of firms to find more efficient ways, and that's why you're seeing some firms, even say, well, the due diligence is now going to be done in Halifax because it can be supported there. It doesn't really get supported by our engine. I think they have to realize that costs are a pressure. Although it would be interesting because the corollary of what we heard is that profits in firms keep going up. So I don't really know their business model. I can tell you that COVID has been extremely disruptive on the business, and companies that have had negative cash earning quarters because it's been so difficult. You have to cut. We've had to take out not headcount, because we didn't do that, but we had to take out any sort of cost that was discretionary or unsubstantiated, and that's what a business has to do to survive. And I don't think big law can be any different. So if that means cutting an office in half, seems like a small sacrifice as opposed to cutting all the actual jobs.
Right.
So.
Do you think and even beyond sort of the law firm context, I had another guest on the podcast who's very interested in economic development, and he actually sees an opportunity in COVID-19 with people sort of more comfortable with working remotely and businesses more comfortable, that maybe the people who are tired of the high price of real estate in Toronto will move out to Atlantic Canada and work from here, and there'll be sort of a big boom for us. Do you think that kind of thing is feasible? Like, would businesses, do you think, be open to that kind of thing going forward? Could that be a legacy of COVID-19?
So I'm going to say practically, I don't see that. Look, I think the pendulum right now is we've proven we can do a lot remotely and through technology, but it's out of necessity. When would we have guessed that we could be lethal to one another? But there is still a lot to be said for. I think the pendulum will swing back because at least into something in the middle, something more balanced, where we still have to collaborate and to keep a business going, and we have to be able to sit in meeting rooms. So, and I just don't think that it's going to be where you can perfectly set your schedule to 2 days in the city and then live elsewhere. Potentially, it might be that within an hour or two of your office location, that sacrifice or that trade-off can be made. But across the country, feels like a stretch to me. At least in my business, which is still a little like I'm, in CPG and consumer packaged goods, it's still a little more traditional. Maybe if you were in IT or something that's really very virtual, even in our business, we will eliminate office space and we will go to a more fluid, agile environment. But I will still be back in the office at least 2 to 3 days a week post-COVID. I have no doubt.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, we're asking ourselves this question too with teaching, right? Because all of our courses went remote, and I think where we're landing, or sort of the prevailing view, is we desperately want to get back to in-person teaching, just because there is value in that connection that you have, being in someone else's physical presence, being in the classroom. There's an energy there that is an experience that's difficult to replicate virtually, but maybe there'll be opportunities sort of like this, where we can have discussions with people who otherwise couldn't come in, but they add value to our community. So there might be opportunities like this that continue after COVID. Just a last question, also COVID related. So a lot of our students are very anxious now because they feel like they're entering into not such a great job market, right? And you mentioned having to adjust your business a little bit. I mean, we're seeing this, across the economy. How should students be thinking about this? Are there opportunities for them to, I don't know, get noticed or differentiate themselves or be competitive or find opportunities in this kind of difficult environment? Do you have any advice for them in that regard?
Yeah, well, it makes me think about we've said this to ourselves, like, never let a good crisis go to waste. So I think there will be lots of opportunities through COVID to differentiate. I don't know what that means for the individual candidate. You asked me about the business, and I said, well, we're still, figuring out some of our learnings. But as a student sort of hitting the pavement, think about what, in your time, what can you do? What is different? How can you make this opportunity into something that enhances who you are? Be it something you've done through COVID, something that you've taken up through COVID. I don't know what that might be. But there are always opportunities that come out of these events. And I think it's about sort of watching for them and taking them. And there are a lot of lawyers, and you'll hear people sort of say there are too many lawyers, but good students, people who are sort of committed to excellence and are curious and are open and are willing to take the chances, there are jobs, and the economy will come back. We've been through too many cycles to not know it will come back. And it's sort of about just preparing yourself and having the courage to take the risks.
Well, I think that's a really fitting point to end on, because it kind of brings full circle some of the themes that you've been talking about, confidence and courage and hard work and, risk taking. And so thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today, Simone. I've really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I'm sure our audience will enjoy it just as much.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored. Thank you for asking me, and I'm happy to contribute in any way.
Wonderful. Well, thanks everyone for listening to another UNB Law podcast. Our guest today was Simone Cole, and stay tuned for a future episode featuring more remarkable people who are part of the UNB Law community. Take care.
Thanks.